I'm just gonna assume I'm not the only one who runs into this problem. Let's say I want to get into something new, maybe a massive franchise. Obviously we have to check out the mainline entries, spin-offs, etc. And then we hit our sticking point. I consider myself something of a completionist, but even I have my limits. Just from the outside, not having touched it, which version of Persona 3 is the best? Unless I really like it, I'm not gonna play it 4 times to decide for myself which is best when I could be using that time to play other entries in the franchise first. And that's only one way to have an alternate version of something. The mere thought giving me anxiety as I imagine my backlog growing so much faster than I can complete it. Just kidding, I don't have to imagine that. I have to make a concession and pick a way, anyway, to go through something for the first time, but what if there are different translations? What order am I gonna go through the franchise? Really, a lot of media doesn't need you to engage with every part of it to enjoy it in some capacity. I like to because I think that's the way I get the most out of things. But really this video is me ruminating on those questions of how we approach that idea of finding the best possible way to go through a given work in the sea of potential. What if we want to start with Persona 3? Which version? Maybe it is better to appreciate having played Persona 1 and 2 first. Oh, but what about the rest of Shin Megami Tensei? Do the anime and manga adaptations have anything worthwhile? What about mods? You might have your answer, or maybe you're as uncertain as me who has yet to dive into anything Persona 3. I don't know what way I might suggest is ideal based on my experiences until I actually have that experience, but even then, my way isn't the only way. I'm very open to alternate experiences, and mine is only my own, used to gather personal understanding with which I can then inform others based on those experiences. A series that I do have experience in, and a long-term one at that, is Karakuri Circus. I started it a long time ago, around high school, because I saw it on a recommendation chart. Its English fan translation began in 2004, and by 2016 around half was translated. The second half took less time to translate, finishing in 2024, and as cited by 2 members of Nakamichi Scanlations, this was the result of the anime that began in 2018. It got their interest and they would eventually join the team that helped bring the series to its total completion. If I were to recommend Karakuri Circus, that's really nice because the manga is just the complete version of the story. The anime adapts the 43-volume run in a mere 36 episodes, cutting whole characters and story arcs to squeeze the most important parts into its runtime. And as a result, it doesn't exactly have the best reputation. I really don't think it could have been much better either. A relatively cult, non-jump action series getting a 100-episode adaptation in the last 10 years is basically unheard of, let alone for anything that had been over for more than a decade, and that's really how many episodes it would take to get a complete adaptation. Dai's Great Adventure got that even being 10 volumes shorter because, of course it did, it's a jump adaptation and tied to the monolithic Dragon Quest franchise. What chance would Karakuri Circus have? I do understand some of the derision, considering I can point at some genuine faults I have with it, but all too often these discussions of the best way to engage in something fall into a binary trap where there is a right and wrong way to experience the story. Sure, there's aspects that make me question if it's even a good way to go through a story at all, like watching it at ×2 speed or jumping into something right in the middle, but sometimes I feel like people think that because the anime is less good, it's just as much the wrong way to go about it. Even putting aside the good the anime accomplished in helping the manga be translated to English by gathering interest, even ignoring the fact that I was interested in the anime because it would give me some closure to the story I'd had some level of investment in for nearly a decade regardless of whether the manga would finish or not, I still liked it. I still vibe with the openings and endings, the soundtrack, I like the performances, it still hits the emotional moments, and even with the cuts it still functions as a compelling story. In at least one area I think the cut strengthens it, as episode 20 has a rather major reveal regarding the main antagonist. I don't want to spoil it, but basically the guy is revealed through flashback to have been 3 characters, only for him to show himself, take off his disguise, and reveal that he was also a 4th character. It's absolutely insane! And I was a little disappointed when the manga translation got to that point, and the chapter before the reveal has a heavy hint as to that 4th character's identity. Where with the anime, the shock of the reveal was followed by certain details clicking into place in my own head that grounded the reveal before it was fully explained. It's not just a moment I happen to think the anime does better, it's one of the moments that stuck with me the hardest from all of Karakuri Circus. But where the other good moments of the anime are good in the manga too, this one didn't do nearly as much for me. But even that isn't without concessions, as following this moment there's a scene removed that takes away heavily from a cool line that is in both anime and manga, and the removal leaves a supporting character without explanation for their following change in allegiance. It's totally fair to take issue with the anime for its faults, especially when it was the only way to engage with this material until the manga translation got there. But we do have both now. Everyone will have their preferences, but I can also say this because I can enjoy their individual strengths while recognizing any faults. Karakuri Circus is a relatively obscure property with a particular history that I'm lucky to be aware of because I was there to witness so much of it. But this is still a pretty simple case at the end of the day since the manga is easier to recommend in most cases. Similar, but rather different, is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Nope, not that one, this one. I'm talking about the Stardust Crusaders OVA. It makes the Karakuri Circus adaptation look bloated in comparison, passing over parts 1, 2, and about half of Stardust Crusaders in a short montage only speed through 4 fights in that half of the story. Trying to imagine what it'd be like to watch it without knowing the source material, it's not the best representation of what the manga is like, really. But if you do have that source material in mind, or even its full adaptation, I think it's absolutely worth experiencing what it does adapt, since I think it's the best version of those battles for what it's able to add to the tone, tension, and atmosphere through its excellent animation and direction. It's a supplemental adaptation, not able to stand on its own, but able to be what it is for the focus it achieves through outsourcing most of the story's context to the primary work. Stranger than either the truncated adaptation or the supplemental one is the case where you could argue there isn't a primary version. Both Akira's anime and manga were helmed by the same original creator, and both use their own respective strengths and medium to great advantage. To the point that it isn't an issue of recommending one over the other, as both are worthwhile independently and in tandem with the other. The anime is one of the most technically impressive works of animation ever, where the manga displays Ultimo's immensely detailed artwork and offers a version of the story that delves into the post-apocalypse that the film barely reaches. The length allowing it to better flesh out its larger cast of characters, many of which have reduced roles in the film. But what's specifically fascinating to me is what the changes the film makes offer to its mood. The climax of the second volume involves Tetsuo delving into the government base to find Akira, and he does, plain and simple. But the anime isn't so straightforward, the contents of the capsule painting a picture much more visceral and haunting. It's not one or the other choice that's stronger or more effective. The manga's choice lends itself to a longer story that explores Akira and the effect his existence has on the world, while the film's take works best for the limits of its runtime. I know I have my preferences between the two, but that doesn't discount that they're both good independently too. That both are comfortably available is a blessing, but time marches on. Want to watch the original Star Wars? Too bad. The widely disliked remastered versions are the ones comfortably available legally in modern releases and streaming services, but outside of older versions floating around, it's fan preservation that keeps the original cuts alive. The original creator doesn't want you to experience that inferior version. Games have their own brand of this thanks to the inevitable loss of so many titles, through hardware becoming outdated and preservation only being possible by the companies with the resources to do anything. Piracy becomes a godsend for preservation efforts, but that too opens its own can of worms. Nowadays, we are absolutely spoiled for subtitles thanks to widespread official Day 1 translations, but back in the day, fan subs were god, and the result was wild swings of quality and conflicts of ethos. Honorifics or no. Natural English or overly literal, or just straight up not even trying to translate words. My anime list actually used to include a feature that allowed watchers to rate up fan subs they preferred to help people find the best one for the show they were planning to check out. But now that's not normalized, stronger subtitle efforts are often less watched in lieu of the safer option. And that's not even getting into the rare odd case. The manga for JoJo's Bizarre Adventures particularly stand out for me. The official translation gives us a physical release with all the advantages that entails, but the monkey's paw is the inability to use many of the proper names for characters due to copyright fears, something that also extends to the official subs and dubs of the anime. The colored manga offers a solution of its own, though at the expense of Araki's unique coloring style with his lack of canonical color palette, and to be a bit of a purist, it's technically not even his art anymore. It still looks good and is worthwhile, but I did want to bring it up. It's that translation that's more pressing, which does include the original names, the fan release not being bound by the chains of illegality in the first place. In exchange, they made the baffling decision to leave certain lines badly translated due to JoJo's prolific meme culture. Getting people in on the joke, somehow, without explaining the reason or context for the translation in the release, to me isn't worth it as someone who has no real interest in engaging with that side of the fandom. Not that I wasn't already well aware of those lines from seeing them posted constantly on top of having partially read those releases back in the day. It kinda bugs me that this reading experience of JoJo was compromised for something that can be supplemented by an older release you can still find and read if you really want to, as if you wouldn't be able to find out anyway just by looking it up or asking. Regardless of my preferences, it sucks to have to choose between two versions with individual weaknesses rather than trying to find the one with the most strengths. Subtitles aren't the only way fans can transform how they engage with a piece of media. With new material running, the discussion of Monogatari watch order rears its ugly head yet again. The release order camp versus the light novel camp, sometimes erroneously called the chronological order camp, that's not what it is. But I'm not so interested in discussing which I think is best or even which method of watching has what value. Even if I, someone who prefers the light novel order, could point to Shaft's release and the light novels and say that there is an intended way to follow the story, that doesn't mean it has to be followed. Even though I'd recommend it that way to newcomers, it wasn't how a lot of people came to find and fall in love with the show on their own, resulting in the still revolving discourse. I wonder if people get invested in discussions like this because of the way our experiences become our identity. Not as much in larger ways of how our memories make up our perception of ourselves and the world around us. In a smaller way, it's how the specific circumstances around how we engage with the media can become a part of that media. Some shows watched with friends might be more memorable than had they been watched alone. A show watched at a particular point in your life can make it hit so much more deeply when it would have bounced off of you at another time. And the order you watch the show can become a part of that show's identity in your memory. Like that one episode you caught out of context before you even knew what it was. Or in cases like Haruhi Suzumiya, Batman the Animated Series, and Monogatari, which have differing watch orders, leading to different room for preferences for either way to emerge. Or fuck watch orders and just drop all the episodes in a playlist and hit shuffle. They sold you the cereal, you can eat it dry, wet, you can just eat the hydrogenated crap at the center of the Oreo too and ignore the cookie. Okay, bad analogy, but what I'm getting at is you can also tailor experiences to your liking by not engaging with everything. Skipping arcs of non-canonical material is often recommended for long-running shonen adaptations. Ashita no Joe 2 starts by readapting the back end of the prior series, so watching every episode in order means going through the same material twice. Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water, has a stretch that's widely considered to be less good than the rest. Recommending that people skip certain parts of the story is rather normalized in the community, and I'm not totally against it either, but we're going to put a pin in that and come back to it later because I also want to talk about perhaps the deepest modification one can have on the art they engage with: video game mods. While it's ultimately limited to a large handful of games, all things considered, for a few in particular, the modern community is practically synonymous with the continuing fanbase around it. But is it for the best that your first and only experience with the game are through modded versions? I mean, maybe. Bug fixes made by fans are mods that, if anything, make the game closer to the original intended experience than the developers were able to manage. But at a certain point, when it comes to skipping material like filler arcs or cramming a bunch of mods that change the game before you even played it, well, how are you supposed to find the best experience possible? On one hand, I do know that outsourcing your opinion is necessary. Most people aren't going to play 4 versions of Persona 3 to decide the strengths and weaknesses of all of them. They're going to go with the one that matches their preferences and interests based on what they hear or just what's most conveniently available. A lot of people do skip filler arcs or skip parts of manga after seeing the anime because they want to get the new material rather than wait for it to be adapted, but while outsourcing your opinion is a matter of course, at a certain point I do think it's not very helpful.
お前ガンツ信者じゃん。人殺しばっかのクソ漫画読んでっからさ。
クソ漫画じゃねえし。お前読んだことあんのかよ。
あるよ。立ち読みでヤンジャン読んでたし。あれ意味わかんねえし。Amazon とか2ちゃんとかでみんなボロクソ言ってんじゃん。
I personally believe that if you really care about something, you should experience it for yourself because outsourcing your opinion can only go so far. I've often found that my perception of a general consensus opinion doesn't match my own feelings, which in turn drives me to experience media on my own terms for myself, not ignoring those outside opinions, but not relying on them entirely either. Maybe you do want to skip some parts of a long series like Boruto, but as someone who's seen it all, I can tell you that there's a lot of strength in the series and value I've gotten out of the episodes crap filler guides tell you to skip. Skipping a part of a series or changing a game through a mod to be more to your tastes is one thing, but how will you know it's to your tastes unless you've tried it? When I watch long shonen adaptations, I'm in part there for the filler, because if I wanted the original experience, I'd just reread the source material. The whole point of me watching the anime is to get a different experience whether I like it better or not. Sure, I could read my physical volumes of One Piece again, but the anime is a whole nother cake. 4 cakes. Too many cakes! Can you really call yourself a One Piece fan if you haven't engaged in the story through its collection of bath salts? It's a very modern privilege to have the level of choice we do. TV channels and film rental allowed choice for individual works, but the culture was able to focus on less at a time. Now there's so much more that even the biggest media on the biggest screens feels like it takes up a smaller piece of the discussion. Between our cell phones and computer monitors, we all have our own screens. Social media and services like Netflix are tailoring those experiences to the individual. It's becoming harder and harder to share those broad experiences, so I want to try and be respectful of those smaller individual experiences even as I state my own preferences. Because when it comes to the times I was more negative towards those alternate experiences, I came to dislike how I approached the discussion. As a fan of the book, I wasn't exactly big on the Hobbit trilogy. After failing to enjoy the first 2 films, I didn't even bother with the third one. Lindsay Ellis's discussion was a better use of my time. But after railing on the problems I had with them for years, my brother shared with me what he did like about them, such as the way they portrayed Thorin's gradual descent into his greed and its fallout, which is secondary in the books where Bilbo is the main character through and through. The way I talked about it was rejecting the perfectly valid experience in another perspective and hindering potential good faith discussion. and that realization would help me shift how I view these alternate experiences. No matter how flawed or uninteresting I think a piece of art is, I never want to hold someone back from sharing a piece of their experience and perspective I might find interesting. Everyone's going to have their preferences, and we should talk about them, especially in respectful and constructive ways. I'd much rather hear someone talk about what they love about something I don't like instead of shit on it, and approaching disliked aspects in a more calm, good faith, and rational way is perfectly fine, but I'm not about to engage with that for something I haven't touched. Even in the wild, seeing some rando shit on something I don't like would probably have me wanting to jump to its defense, knowing me. And when someone shits on something I know nothing about, I get this feeling in my chest of wanting to experience that art and find the value in it no one else is seeing. Maybe I'm asking for too much to have people be confident enough in their own preferences to be able to accept their own points of view in tandem with differing ones. Actually, as I put that into words, if more people were able to do that, a lot of societal issues would be solved. But what can I say? Maybe I'm a bit of an idealist. Thanks for checking out this sort of stream of consciousness video I've been thinking about for a little while. More to come, as usual. I'd love your support if you've got it in yet, and thank you for watching.